Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Hopefully you are well and fine and hale and hearty and must be catching up all the lectures of this chapter number 2 related to software development life cycle on time. This is a very important chapter and all the steps and phases are equally important. So as you know, we are actually doing the phases involved in the life cycle of a software, in the development life cycle of a software. We were done with the defining phase. We were done with the planning phase. In defining phase, you already know the customers and stakeholders meetings occur. Customer places the demand if he wants to get a new software developed from scratch, a new system developed from scratch, or if he wants to upgrade the existing system installed in his organization. So he places the order, he places the demand, and he tells his requirements. What are his requirements? He tells his requirements to the software development team members. So in planning phase, the project manager plans the resources, the cost, the personnel which would be required. So all the things would be planned which would be required during the development life cycle of that proposed system or project, from personnel to the budget and alternatives and alternative solutions. In feasibility, the strengths and weaknesses of that proposed system is measured from 4 or 5 technical areas, and in analysis phase, certain questions are analyzed by the project manager, by the system analyst, by the team members. They would held a discussion among them, and they would discuss that this project is going to be feasible, be significant for the organization. Should we go after this project with available resources, machinery, hardware and things like that? They would ask certain questions in order to analyze that where they stand, and they should opt for the development of this software or not. Should they start the development of that software? That proposed software would be beneficial for their reputation, for their market, for their customer base or not, and things like that. They would analyze the existing system installed in the customer's organization. They would try to analyze the deficiencies existing in that already installed system. They would try to catch those deficiencies. They would try to analyze or those gaps and things like that. And then they would, especially the system analyst and the project manager, they would then try to develop new specifications. They would try to develop specifications for the newly proposed system, for the newly proposed software, and they would actually propose certain models, and they would propose one suitable model and one suitable roadmap in order to develop that proposed system or software. And they would produce at the end of this phase a deliverable. They would produce a software requirement specification document. Now moving on towards our next phase, that is requirement engineering phase. We are done with defining phase, planning phase, feasibility phase, and fourth one, analysis phase. So basically till date we are done with 4 phases of the software development life cycle. Our today's objective is to actually cover the concepts of this 5th phase called as the requirement engineering phase. So what is requirement engineering? As the name is indicating, something to do with the requirements. But before starting with this phase, you need to understand this concept that we talked about requirements in the first phase of software development life cycle. we talked about the requirements in defining phase, that the customer places or tells his requirements to the software development team, requirements regarding that what actually he wants. He tells his requirements that either he wants to upgrade an existing system, or either he wants a new system or software to be developed from scratch. So he tells these sort of requirements. But in requirement engineering phase, these requirements are totally different. These are the requirements which are actually needed by the project manager, which are needed by the software development team in order to develop that proposed software, in order to develop that proposed system. Requirements like what software would be required, what type of hardware would be required to in order to develop that software, what type of personnel or staff or technical staff, what experts would be required in order to complete certain steps of that proposed software system. So these type of requirements related to the development of that proposed software, requirements which would be actually required by the software development team, which would be used by those software development team. So requirement engineering is the process to gather the software requirements from client, analyze and document them, is known as requirement engineering. Another thing is that it also involves the requirements which are collected from the from the end user, from those users who are actually using the existing system which is already installed in the customer's organization. These are the end users for whom the customer is actually for whom the customer has actually placed an order of a new software system. Those end users would be in future going to actually use that software or proposed system who's currently under development. So requirement engineering is the process to gather the software requirements from client, from the end users, and document them, is known as requirement engineering. Those requirements are gathered, analyzed and documented. So it is the process of determining user expectations, the end users expectations, document them. Those end user expectations can include certain features. The end users can say that they want these type of features in that new system or new software which is under development. So those features are actually those features required are actually detailed or listed in the document. So it is the process of determining user expectations for a new proposed system, for a new proposed software. Requirements engineering is a set of activities used to identify and communicate the purpose of a software system and the framework in which it will be used. So the objective of this phase is to define in more detail the system inputs, processes, outputs and interfaces. At the end of this phase, the system's processes will be defined at the functional level, meaning the functions to be performed will be known. So requirement engineering will identify and consider the risks related to how the technology will be integrated into the standard operating procedures, into the existing SOPs. So requirements analysis will collect the functional and system requirements of the business process, the user requirements and the operational requirements. For example, when operational, what is necessary to keep the system up and running. The goal of requirement engineering is to develop and maintain sophisticated and descriptive system requirements specification document. So basically the SRS was the software requirement specification document was actually started in the analysis phase, but in that SRS document which was developed in the analysis phase, things from the requirement engineering phase would also be included in that SRS document. So the requirement engineering phase consists of the following steps. 4 following steps. Requirement gathering. First, the requirements would be gathered. Requirements which are necessary would be gathered. Then requirement validation. Those requirements would be approved, would be validated. Then software requirement specifications, and then those requirements would be managed. When they would be used in the organization, they would be managed. So what is the first step of requirement engineering is requirement gathering. What is requirement gathering? If the feasibility report is in the feasibility phase, if the feasibility report is positive towards undertaking the project, if the feasibility report gives a green signal for the development of that proposed software or system, the next phase starts with gathering requirements from the user. System analysts and system engineers communicate with the client, with the customer who has placed the order for the development of a new system. So they would communicate with that customer organization. They would communicate with the end users, with the users who are using the system inside that customer organization. They would communicate with that customer, with that client, with those end users to know their ideas on what the software should provide and which features they want the software to include. They would ask from the end users that the end users are already, as they are using the existing system. So in the new system, in the new proposed system, what type of features actually they want, what type of features they want to get added into the new proposed system or software. So in this meetings with the customers are arranged, with the customer organization are again arranged. The market requirements and the features that are in demand are analyzed. The market requirements and the features which are in demand are discussed with the customer, with the customer organization. So in requirement gathering, a step happens. This step is called as requirement elicitation technique. The requirement elicitation technique is part of requirement gathering. Through requirement elicitation technique, certain requirements are actually dig out, certain requirements are find out. Requirement elicitation is the process to find out the requirements for an intended proposed software or system by communicating with the client, with the end users, with the system users, and others who have a stake, who have a part in the software system development. Means in requirement elicitation technique, requirements are find out by communicating with the client, with the customer organization, with the end users, etc. That what do actually they want, what type of features they want to get added into the new proposed system or software. So this is the process of deriving the system requirements through observation of existing systems, by discussions with the stakeholders like customers and clients and end users. So this may involve the development of one or more system models and prototypes that can help us understanding the system to be specified. So there are various ways to discover the requirements through requirement elicitation technique. Requirement elicitation technique allows certain techniques, certain ways to discover the requirements from the end user, from the customer, and these requirement elicitation techniques are: number one, interviews. Interviews are a strong medium to collect requirements. So organization may, the software development team may conduct several types of interviews, such as structured or closed interviews, where every single information together is decided in advance. They follow the pattern and matter of discussion firmly. Non-structured or open interviews are conducted where information together is not decided in advance. Questions are not decided in advance. Questions which are going to be asked from the in structured interviews. Questions are already structured. Questions are already decided by the software development team, that what type of questions would be asked from the end users, from the customer, from the client. While in non-structured interviews, questions are not already decided. They are randomly asked from the end user, from the customer, from the client. So non-structured interviews are the interviews where information together is not decided in advance, and they are more flexible and they are less biased. Or oral interviews and written interviews are actually conducted. One-to-one interviews are conducted, which are held between two persons across the table. Group interviews are conducted, which are held between groups of participants. They help to uncover any missing requirements as numerous people are involved. Certain surveys are conducted. Surveys are also a type of requirement elicitation technique. In surveys, organization may conduct surveys among various stakeholders by querying about their expectations, by asking questions about their expectations and requirements from the upcoming or proposed or under development system. Another requirement elicitation technique is questionnaires, distribution of questionnaires. A document with predefined a questionnaire is a document with predefined set of objective questions, and respective options are handed over to all the stakeholders to answer, which are collected and compiled afterwards. A shortcoming of this technique is that if an option for some issue is not mentioned, some option is missing in the questionnaire, the issue might be left unattended. Another elicitation technique is task analysis. Team of engineers and developers may analyze the operation, job or work for which the new system is required. If the client already has some software to perform certain operations, it is studied and requirements of proposed system are collected. Another elicitation technique through which the software development team collects the response of the end users or customers is domain analysis. Every software falls into some domain category. The expert people in the domain can be a great help to analyze general and specific requirements. Some software belongs to the domain of databases. Some software under development belongs to the domain of operating systems. Some software or system under development belongs to the domain of application softwares. So every system or software under development actually belongs to some domain. So the software development team contacts the experts or specialists of those certain domains, and they ask their help in order to analyze general and specific requirements. Another elicitation technique is brainstorming. An informal debate is held among various stakeholders. All their inputs are recorded for further requirement analysis. Another elicitation technique is prototyping. Prototyping is building user interface without adding any detailed functionality for user to interpret the features of intended software product. Prototype is like a sample or a dummy model, not the original product, but the sample for the product is actually the prototype. Prototype helps giving better idea of requirements. If there is no software installed at client's end for developer's reference and the client is not aware of its requirements, the developer creates a prototype based on initially mentioned requirements. Here the point is that if the organization doesn't have any existing system installed inside its premises, then in that case, how the software development team would know that what the existing or current system was working like. So in that case, they would develop a prototype or sample for that proposed system or software, so the client or the customer organization can have an idea that what the proposed system can look like. So the prototyping is actually used to show the client and a rough sample, a rough model, and the feedback of the client or customer is noted. The client feedback, the customer's feedback serves as an input for requirement engineering. Another elicitation technique is observation. Team of experts visit the customer's organization or workplace. They observe the actual working of the existing system installed in that organization, if there exists any existing system. They observe the workflow at customers' end and how execution problems are dealt. The team itself draws some conclusions which aid to form requirements expected from the software. So we are still talking about the requirement gathering phase. In requirement gathering phase, we talked about the requirement elicitation techniques, certain requirement elicitation techniques. Now we are talking about the types of requirements. Broadly, software requirements are categorized into two categories. These requirements are of two types. In requirement gathering, we are talking about the types of requirements. Either there are functional requirements, either there are non-functional requirements. There are two types of requirements. They are categorized into two categories: functional requirements and non-functional requirements. So, first of all, we talk about functional requirements. So, functional requirements are the requirements which are defined, which actually define in more detail the system inputs, system processes, system outputs, and system interfaces. Means functional requirements are the requirements which are concerned with system inputs, system processes, system outputs, and system interfaces. During the requirements analysis phase of component-based service development, an entire system's functional and non-functional requirements are defined. The functional requirements relate to the way the component-based service will fulfill the business need. So, functional requirements tell that what the system actually do. Functional requirements actually tell about the features. Functional requirements tell about the features of a system or software. Means functional requirements are concerned with the features, options or instructions displayed on the interface of the software or system. Functional requirements are concerned with the operations of that proposed system or software, that what would be the instructions or options displayed on the interface, what features, options, or instructions would be available to the user inside that proposed system or software, what operations could be performed by the end user by using those features or instructions or options. So functional requirements specify the software functionality. Of course, the instructions, features, options, the interface, they tell about the functionality or operations of the system or software. So, functional requirements specify the software functionality that the developers must build into the product to enable users to accomplish their tasks. They are here. The concept again and again is repeated about the features, options, and instructions displayed on the interface of the software. Which features or instructions or options should be built into the proposed system or software to enable the user to accomplish the tasks. For example, we talk about a website. the customer demanded a website from the software development team. They developed a website or web portal for the customer organization. Now, what they developed is that in order to enter inside that website, in order to enter inside that web portal, they designed a login feature, a password feature and a login feature. As you already know about that, in order to enter inside your web portal, you need to give a user ID and you need to give a password. So these type of features are actually part of the functional requirements. Functional requirements are the requirements which describe processes, tasks, features, operations, instructions, options, interface that the end user or customer or consumer must be able to accomplish through the use of the system. These can typically be categorized as processes that require action on the part of consumer. Means why we say that functional requirements actually are concerned with the inputs. Why they are concerned with the inputs? Because these are the features which actually demand certain type of input from the user who wants to enter inside that proposed system or software. I'll again give you an example of your web portal. In web portal, the input feature is login and password, through which you can input your password and user ID into the web portal, and when you give that input, some processing happens, and the system allows you to enter inside it, and you would use the features or certain options of that system or software, which would generate some outputs. You would be able to use its interfaces. So that's why we also say that functional requirements are concerned with processes too, because whenever you click on some option or feature, some process happens. As a result, some output gets generated. Processes like you have to enter password or login ID, you have to do some data entry, you select a command or instruction or option. The functional requirements are not directly related to human interaction with the system. There are certain functional requirements like off-hours processing or the automated exchange of information between the systems. These sort of things are not performed by the user. The system or the server on which that web portal or system or software has been installed, that server automatically performs these automatic exchange of information between the servers. So there are functional requirements which are not in control of the user. They are controlled by the underlying system, by the servers, etc. I'll give you an example of credit card or ATM card. ATM card verification is an example of functional requirement. For example, when you go to an ATM machine, you enter a PIN code from your, you see a PIN code from your ATM card, and you enter that PIN code into the ATM machine. So that ATM machine is now taking that PIN code as an input. So that we can say that ATM card PIN code or ATM card validation by the ATM machine is an example of functional requirement. Non-functional requirements are technical in nature. A requirement that states that a response must be returned to the consumer within 2 seconds is an example of non-functional requirement. Features, options, operations, interface, instructions developed should be easy to operate, quick in response, effectively handling operational errors, providing simple yet consistent user interface. So user acceptance majorly depends upon how the user can use the software, how much time the features or instructions or options or the interface is taking to get operated. User interface is the only way for users to perceive the system. to get the system, to understand the system. A well-performing software system must be equipped with attractive, clear, easy to use, friendly, consistent and responsive user interface. So we can say that functional requirements are basically concerned with the operations, instructions, features, interface of the proposed system or software, that how the things would be used by the end user, which type of features would be used by the end user. Now coming towards the non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements are the requirements which are not related to functional aspect of a software, which are not related to the features, options, interface, operations of a software, of a proposed system. Non-functional requirements consist of more details like performance of the system, performance of those interface, performance of those features. Means the system will work, or the features or the instructions or the interface of that proposed system will work in how much time. The features will, the instructions or options will respond in how much time. Operations would take how much time to get done. Means the overall speed of the system, the overall responsiveness of the system, overall response time of the system. The best term to use here is that functional requirements are concerned with the response time of the system or software, that in how much time that system would respond against a feature, option or instruction. So non-functional requirements specify criteria for the judgment of a system. Non-functional requirements specify criteria for the judgment of the operations of a system. Here the judgment of the operations of a system means the operations, the features, the instructions or the options of a system are judged, that in how much time these operations, features, options or instructions are giving response to the user. It describes that how well the system performs its duties. So non-functional requirements include security, logging, storage, configuration, performance, cost, interoperability, flexibility, disaster, recovery and accessibility. These things actually mean that a non-functional requirement of a system or software is concerned with that if a user is clicking on login option or login feature of the system or software, then that login feature or login option responds in how much time. It is concerned with the response speed or response time of that system, that how much speedy that system or software is in giving response back to the user, and things like that. Means we can say that if a web portal, if you are logging into a web portal and you are giving the login ID, you are giving the password, and it just that the interface of that web portal gets opened quickly into few seconds, when you into nanoseconds when you give the login and the password. That means the speed or response time of that web portal is high. But if you enter into a web portal on which you are entering your login ID and password, but even after giving the login ID and password, that system is slowly capturing your login ID and your password, and it is giving the response after many seconds. The interface and the web portal gets open up after seconds or after minutes of giving your login ID or password. That means the response time of that system is not that much high. So the non-functional requirements are concerned with the response time, with that in how much time the operations are getting done. So non-functional requirements are basically concerned with the quality of, with the response time of that software, of that system, or of that product. It is concerned with the safety, it is concerned with the security. Non-functional requirements are concerned with the performance or response time. They are concerned with the response time of the interface. They are concerned with the accuracy. They are concerned with the reliability. As you can see, in security, confidentiality and integrity is there, means the non-functional requirements are concerned with the confidentiality, integrity too. They are concerned with the response time, with the space, with availability, with execution time, that if you click any option or instruction on the interface, in how much time it will be executed, in how much time it will respond back. The understandability, accessibility, convenience, throughput, user interaction time, device interaction time, service interoperability. So these all things are basically concerned with non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirement is a combination of all these things. Non-functional requirement is concerned with all these things. It is also concerned with development requirements, with processes. In processes, it is concerned with cost, variability, maintainability, deadline, changeability, analyzability. So these all things are concerned, are part of non-functional requirements. As non-functional requirements are concerned with the processes, concerned with the cost of the process, with the variability, changeability, and maintainability of that process. So non-functional requirements are concerned with the quality of service, all sub stuff concerned with quality of service. They are concerned with compliance requirements. They are concerned with development requirements. They are concerned with architectural constraints. So till this moment we were talking about the first step of requirement engineering, that was requirement gathering. We were totally talking about requirement gathering, in which we talked about requirement elicitation techniques. We talked about the techniques involved in requirement elicitation, and we talked about the categories of requirements, functional and non-functional requirements. Now talking about the second step involved in requirement engineering, that is requirement validation. After the requirements are gathered, means all type of requirements are gathered from the customer, from the end user, through observations, through interviews, through surveys, through questionnaires. All the requirements are now being gathered from the end user, and the functional as well as non-functional requirements are also gathered. The other step would be requirement validations, means the requirements which are gathered using the elicitation techniques, requirements which involve functional and non-functional requirements. All these requirements are now validated in this step. How they are validated? Requirement validation is concerned with examining the requirements to certify, to confirm that they meet the intentions of the stakeholders or not. Means requirements are validated, they are examined, they are certified, they are confirmed, they are monitored, that either they meet the intentions of the customers, either they meet the intentions of the stakeholders, either they meet the intentions of the software development team or not. These requirements are needed by the software development team or not. So the validation differs from verification, in the sense that verification occurs after requirements have been accepted, after the requirements have been validated. In requirements validation, the requirements gathered are reviewed. In requirements validation, the requirements gathered which were gathered in the requirement gathering stage, the requirements gathered are actually reviewed in the requirement validation step in order to check that the requirements are complete or not, that the requirements are accurate or not. So these things are checked in the requirement validation stage. After requirement specifications are developed, the requirements mentioned in the requirement specification document are validated. User might ask for illegal or impractical solutions, or experts may interpret the requirements incorrectly. So this results in huge increase in cost if not solved, if the requirement issue is not solved at the beginning before the design or development stage. That would cost a lot on further stages. If requirements are ambiguous or there are some conflicts in requirements of various stakeholders, if they are, it is then negotiated and discussed with stakeholders. Requirements may then be prioritized and reasonably compromised. The requirements come from various stakeholders. To remove the ambiguity and conflicts, they are discussed with the customers, with the end users for clarity and correctness. Requirements cannot be validated until and unless they are not clear, they are not correct. Unrealistic requirements are compromised reasonably, they are eliminated. Requirement validation is basically the process of checking the requirements for realism, that how realistic, how practical they are. Requirement validation is the process of checking the requirements for consistency, for completeness, etc. During requirement validation process, the main goal of software development team is to discover the errors in the requirement document, the errors or inaccuracies in the requirements. When errors are found in the requirement specification document, in software requirement specification document, these errors are removed and the software requirement specification document is modified to correct these problems. So requirements can be checked against the following conditions. If requirements are checked that they can be practically implemented or not. Requirements gathered in the requirement gathering stage are checked if they are valid as per functionality and domain of the software or not. Requirements gathered in the requirement gathering step are analyzed or checked for this purpose, that if the requirements are complete or not. Requirements are also checked for this purpose, that if the requirements can be demonstrated or not. So what happens in a requirement validation stage, that requirements are only validated if they are properly defined and specified. If the requirements are prioritized in requirement validation, the requirements are basically can be checked against the conditions, that if the requirements can be prioritized, requirements are validated in that case if they are checked that if the requirements can be classified or not, if any ambiguities or conflicts can be resolved in the requirements. In that case, the requirements are validated. Requirements are also checked against the condition that if the domain of the software is valid or not, etc. So keeping in view these conditions, requirements are validated. So we were talking about the requirement engineering phase. In requirement engineering phase, we talked about its first step, that is requirement gathering. We talked about its second step, that is requirement validation. Now we are talking about the third step of requirement engineering, that is requirement specification. That is basically concerned with software requirement specification document. So software requirement specification document is a document created by system analyst after the requirements are collected from various stakeholders, and after the requirements are validated completely. So software requirement document defines how the intended software will interact with hardware, external interfaces, speed of operations, response time of system, portability of software across various platforms, maintainability, speed of recovery after crashing, security, quality, limitations, etc. So documentation is concerned with that all formal and informal, functional and non-functional requirements are documented in the form of software requirement specification document, and this document is actually made available for the next phase, for helping in the next phase. So requirement specification is basically it's the activity of writing down the information gathered during the elicitation, during the gathering phase, during the validation phase, and that document actually defines a set of requirements. So two types of requirements may be included in this document: functional requirements and non-functional requirements. So the requirements received from client are written in human natural language like English or Urdu or etc. These are natural languages which the humans speak. So it is the responsibility of system analyst to document the requirements in technical language. The requirements are received from the end users, from the customers in natural language, but they are written into the form of software requirement specification document in technical language so that they can be comprehended and useful by the software development team. So SRS, software requirement specification document, should come up with following features, SRS should include following features. It should include user requirements expressed in natural languages, means what actually things are included in an SRS document. So software requirement specification document includes user requirements expressed in natural language. It includes technical requirements expressed in structured languages, technical languages. SRS document also includes design description written in pseudocode, and it also includes forms and graphical user interface screen layouts. Now, the last step involved in requirement engineering phase is requirement management. Requirement management is performed to ensure that the software continues to meet the expectations of the acquirer who is acquiring, who's purchasing those requirements. So it is requirement management is performed to ensure that the software continues to meet the expectations of the acquirer and the user. Requirements management needs to gather new requirements that arise from changing expectations, new regulations, or other sources of change. Means when the software development team would be busy in developing a software or a proposed system, if some requirements need to get changed, or they suddenly remember that they need some new requirement, at that time requirement management allows them to actually deal with that changing expectations, with those changing requirements. Again, an example from your book, that in the student examination system development project, if the development team gathers the necessary information by interviewing the users, giving questionnaires, or by reading existing documents, the software requirements are the description of features and functionalities of the target system. So the requirements convey the expectations of users from the software product. The requirements can be obvious or hidden, known or unknown, expected or unexpected from client's point of view. So the requirements which are collected through different elicitation techniques are then validated. After validation, they are actually listed into the SRS document. Afterwards, they are purchased. In a requirement, before requirement management, it happens that all the requirements are made available to the software development team, or the requirements are, if they are to be purchased from the market, they are purchased, they are made available. Then the software development team starts working on the proposed software or project. But afterwards, if during the development process some other need arises for a new requirement, then the requirement management allows them to actually deal with that new requirement or new expectation. It allows them to arrange or purchase that new requirement from the market if some need arises. Requirement management allows the software development team to manage those requirements, those resources over the period of time. It allows them to manage the requirements effectively. So if we summarize the requirement engineering phase, in its first step was requirement gathering. The developers discuss, in this phase, the developers discuss with the customer, with the end users, and they try to know their expectations from the software. Then we talk about organizing the requirements. The developers prioritize and arrange the requirements in order of importance, urgency, and convenience. Then in requirement engineering, some negotiation and discussion also happens in the requirement gathering phase, that if requirements are ambiguous or there are some conflicts in requirements of various stakeholders, if they are, it is then negotiated and discussed with stakeholders. Requirements may then be prioritized and reasonably compromised. The requirements come from various stakeholders to remove the ambiguity and conflicts. They are discussed for clarity and correctness. Unrealistic requirements are compromised unreasonably. Then documentation happens in the SRS documentation step. All the formal and informal, functional and non-functional requirements are documented and made available for next phases, for the other phases. So in requirement gathering, requirement gathering happens through requirement elicitation techniques, in which users' needs are collected through different elicitation techniques, and system models and prototypes are also used for customers' convenience. If any existing or currently installed system does not exist at customer's end, or if any existing system does not exist at customer's end, at customer's side, so in that case prototype is made. Then requirement validation. In requirement validation, customer requirements are checked for their completion and accuracy, for their practicality, while in requirement validation, requirements are, as I told you earlier, requirements are checked. In requirement specification, SRS document is actually created. Software requirement specification document is created, in which all the gathered and validated requirements are listed and noted. While in the last step of requirement engineering and requirement management, this phase actually happens when the development phase is happening, when the working on the software development or system development has been started. Likewise, in each and every phase, some activities occur, some requirements are used in that phase of system development life cycle. So when these requirements are used at that time, the step of management occurs. These requirements are managed in a way, they are maintained. If some requirement occurs suddenly, that requirement is accommodated and things like that. So today we are done with all the further sub-steps of the major requirement engineering step. So inshallah, in our next lecture we would move further to the design and development phase. Till then, Allah Hafiz.